Welcome to Biztech's Enterprise Show, where we feature companies across different industries as they build and scale their businesses. Today, we're going to take a look at the food delivery business, and the featured company is foodpanda, an online food and grocery delivery platform owned by Delivery Hero, which is headquartered in Berlin and listed on the DAX, the leading stock market index in Germany. Now, our guest today is Sayantan Das. He's the managing director, foodpanda Malaysia. Now, Sai, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Brian. It's great to be on and super excited to have this chat with you.
Now, Sai, give us an overview of what foodpanda does and give us a perspective of its history as well.
Sure. So foodpanda has been around now for approximately 8 to 9 years, if we're talking about it from a Malaysian context. We operate across large parts of Southeast Asia. So we're kind of a well-diversified platform when it comes to online food ordering. Some of the markets you might be familiar with, such as Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, we have a sizable presence in those markets. But we also operate in some frontier markets, such as Pakistan and Bangladesh, which are really exciting geographies for us. Close to around 3 to 4 years ago, we were acquired by a company called Delivery Hero, as you mentioned earlier on. And Delivery Hero went to list publicly around late 2017. And so since then, we've been a subsidiary of Delivery Hero. We're wholly owned by them, operating across around 12 to 13 markets across APAC. Delivery Hero itself is the parent entity for around 50 brands worldwide, and we have a presence as a function of that network across the Middle East, Latin America, Turkey, and Europe. And so foodpanda, basically in its essence, is an online food delivery platform, but now we're much more than that. So we were considered an online food commerce platform, but now we're pivoting to enter a space called quick commerce, where we deliver food, but also stuff beyond that as well.
And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, because you've done some interesting stuff, which I found out as part of my research. But traditionally in Malaysia itself, give us a feel of the kind of demographics of your users. Who's been buying from you, and has that changed over the years?
Sure. So when we first launched, of course, we had the early adopters come onto the platform. So people you would consider digital natives. And we have to keep in mind, in large parts of Southeast Asia, a lot of people consider apps to be the go-to source to access the internet. And so, for example, Indonesia, which is one of the markets we don't operate in, but what we see there in terms of research is Facebook is actually the internet. That is the gateway for a lot of Indonesians to understand and consume what is happening across the internet. And so when we first launched, we had similar sort of demographics, adopt foodpanda and kind of adapt their behavior accordingly. But we have to keep in mind that food delivery has been around for a long, long time. If you just track back and maybe you look at other markets, even Malaysia, the likes of Domino's, the likes of Pizza Hut, KFC, McDonald's, they had already engaged in food delivery. And what we did differently was we aggregated the space. And so we're a food delivery aggregator in the sense that we bring on multiple merchants, multiple restaurants in this case, and we connect these restaurants to customers. And it so happens that we do it through last mile delivery via our logistics fleet. And so back in the day, that was the original premise of the birth or the genesis of foodpanda. Now coming back to your question in terms of what the demographics look like. So it was very much urban centric when we first launched, but steadily we also started expanding our services across other townships, other cities all across Malaysia. And what we saw is we broke down barriers steadily. So anyone and everyone who has access to the internet via a smartphone predominantly, they would now be able to use foodpanda. And so we see that the dominant age group that uses foodpanda is still between the ranges of 25 to 34 years old. But we see many more students using the service, and we see many more retirees or senior citizens using the service as well. And one interesting caveat is that we have actually a high proportion of females, ladies using foodpanda versus men, I guess, because they control, the home economy. So husbands are pretty scared when it comes to money matters at home, and so they rely on their wives. But that's one interesting nuance around the service that we provide.
Now, one of the things which I thought was interesting when companies like yourself, started expanding rapidly was it democratized food delivery. Now, why do I say that? Because essentially, what you were allowed to do is the little guy who was operating from a little shop in a terrible location was able to then get out and sell to across his whole geographical area. So if somebody in the Klang Valley who is, you know, in Kepong somewhere, who but has great char kway teow, well, the guys in Subang are ordering it as well. So I think that one of the things that people don't talk about enough was really how much you helped merchants like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think what we wanted to establish, as you correctly mentioned, was democratization in this space. And so what that basically means is we wanted to provide equal opportunity to small business owners, medium business owners, and large business owners to be able to acquire their own customer base without having to undergo the cost of having to set up their own delivery network. And as you correctly mentioned out, someone who is located in point A could now access an entirely new customer base. And that customer base might be located in point B, that might be 5 to 10 kilometers away from that location, from that restaurant location. And we unlocked those kind of consumers for that kind of restaurant. And so what this kind of gave rise to was a network effect as well, because with the throughput and with the revenues that we saw being generated as a result of delivery being accessible by these businesses, it provided them with the power to actually expand their network as well. And so this small to medium business owner in Kepong could then go around and go about and actually launch and expand his or her business in other cities like Penang, JB, et cetera, et cetera. So definitely that's what we see developing as trends throughout our base. And that's something that we're very proud of.
So that's interesting. So that's something that hasn't come out in the data yet. So people who traditionally had local businesses are setting up in other cities as well.
That's right. So of course, we are very much a hyperlocal service. So what we do is we engage in hyperlocal deliveries across the last mile on demand. And so from a restaurant, we would only probably deliver up to a maximum of 15 or 20 kilometers. So that means that you still have blind spots or white spaces in terms of coverage areas. But with the advent of delivery, a lot of restaurants actually pivoted their business model. And what they focused on was lesser investments in terms of capital intensive investments. So lesser investments into the brick and mortar side of their restaurants and more investments into making their restaurants delivery friendly. And this allowed them with sort of cash flows to build more outlets. And I mean, as a function of this, they then expanded themselves to establishing their business outside of their host zone or their host geography. And this was only made possible because of the volumes they generated via delivery.
Sai, so basically, one of the things that you guys were able to do is create a whole new industry called ghost kitchens.
Yeah, that's right. So it's actually an industry that has existed. And if you think about it, you know, you will find a lot of similarities between what we now consider new business, but there's already kind of the basis for it when you backtrack and look at how other businesses have traditionally operated. And one of the best examples of this is, again, Domino's. So they have actually been, I mean, they're sort of pioneers in this space, and we look up to them quite a bit because how they modeled their restaurants, how they modeled their F&B concept was to have actually small format, small size outlets, which would cater to delivery only orders. Of course, the key difference being that they only engaged in pizza deliveries. We engage in deliveries starting from pizza to burgers to chicken rice to everything else. But yes, we kind of established the ghost kitchens concept in Malaysia about 2 years ago. And as a result of this, we are now providing the opportunity for many more business owners to occupy spaces within our ghost kitchens or within our cloud kitchens without having to go through the hassle of understanding where they need to set up a kitchen. Because if you set up a kitchen or if you set up an F&B outlet, the limiting factors, or one of the limiting factors is location. And if you set up an outlet in a location that is not conducive for delivery, that might mean the end of your business. But we kind of take away that hassle. We locate the kitchens, or we place kitchens in locations where we know deliveries will provide an uptick in volumes almost immediately. And then the kitchen owners or the business owners can actually come in and we take away the hassle of increasing volumes from day one, and we take away the hassle of having to invest in capital intensive projects.
So in fact, one of the key things for F&B business owners in terms of a pivot is actually the following. Those people who, because of this movement control orders and all the challenges that we have with COVID, basically can either, if you're looking at an F&B business, the cloud kitchen is probably first starting point to test out your concept. On the other side of the equation, it could also be shutting down your physical outlet and moving to a cloud kitchen.
Correct. So a lot of restaurants have pivoted from that perspective. And so what they're now seeing is that, I mean, dine-in is, of course, heavily restricted. And we don't know when we would get back to pre-COVID levels when it comes to dine-in. So your throughput per square foot, in other words, your revenue per square foot is highly diluted because you don't get those customers into your four walls. And so then there's this kind of mindset shift that has happened where restaurant owners, business owners have started to rely and kind of pivot their business to depend more and more on what we call digital methods or digital channels of delivery. And so basically what restaurant owners are doing is they're looking at how much space they need to occupy. And in most cases, if they're going down this cloud kitchen route, they would probably need 30 to 40% of the original space that they had originally planned.
Okay.
So in effect, they would pay less rent, they would pay less in terms of labor costs, and they would pay less in terms of refurbishment costs. And then the business would basically be driven forward with incrementally higher margins through delivery providers. And that's how the mindset shift has taken place.
Okay, now, so here's also another challenge. Part of some of the criticisms that came across, you've got, when delivery companies like yourself started to really take hold, was the fact that the commission levels were rather high. And how have you been able to juggle the different priorities of cost versus revenue versus balancing act with your drivers, with your merchants? Walk us through some of the challenges that you've had to go through in the last couple of years, Sai.
Sure, great question. I mean, so I think we all know that food delivery or delivery in general is a very cost-intensive business where we have to rely on paper-thin margins. So even if you read on the surface that, there's commission rates that might range from 30 to 40%, a huge majority of that would actually go in the form of earnings towards riders. And now let's keep in mind that, the pandemic has sort of disrupted livelihoods all across the world. And one of the implications of that is many people have lost their primary sources of income because they've been laid off. And so they had to look at other forms of employment or other forms of income to sustain their livelihoods. And what we said very early on is that we would not want to degrade the quality of life of these people who join us as riders in the fleet. So we would want to maintain those kind of income levels. And another key sort of unique factor is people who work within the fleet in foodpanda, they're actually considered as gig economy workers. So they have the freedom to work whenever they choose, and they can actually manage their schedules accordingly. But coming back to your original question, in terms of how we balance cost and revenue and, let's say, break even and profitability, I'm actually very happy to say that we are actually break even right now. And we have positive margins. So that's actually a very, very good sign. And that's a function of the number of years that we've been operating and a function of how we've invested into our technology and into our product. So we've been able to automate a lot of processes. We've been able to develop better technologies to ensure that we can actually cover costs and absorb a lot of the costs that we were facing early on during our initial days. So there's still, of course, a lot of costs involved in terms of paying our superheroes who are our riders. There's still a lot of costs involved in terms of marketing these mom and pop shops that come online. But we actually have a very solid business model right now that's well balanced in terms of cost and revenues.
Sai, one of the things that also is probably less documented in the literature, but I think it has been observed on many occasions, is the fact that there has been a decrease in mud rumpet activities after the delivery companies started expanding, because essentially, I mean, the hypothesis is that they were earning far more money than they had ever done before as delivery, as dispatch boys and so forth. And that's given people a sense of ownership. Can you, Sai, walk us through some of the observations that you've had, and also what perhaps an average delivery rider perhaps earns these days in Malaysia?
Yeah, I mean, it's a unique observation. It's an acute observation. I mean, of course, those kind of those kind of rumblings have reached us in the sense that we've sort of been able to absorb the remnants into our fleet. But I would say there's, of course, a whole host of macroeconomic plays or forces at play over here that enable that to happen. So average earnings for a food delivery rider would range somewhere from 3,000 to 5,000 ringgit a month. I think, again, it comes down to the mindset shift, because I was mentioning earlier on that we've given rise to this economy, which is now labeled the gig economy, and it's scaling more and more as we speak. And so that has afforded the opportunity to a lot of these guys to actually think about these earnings as their own earnings in terms of them running their own business, because they choose when to work, they choose how long they want to work, and they choose how productive they want to be. And so very similar to how you want to run your own business, the more effort you put in, the likelihood is the more output you would have. It's similar to how you would behave as a food delivery rider. So the more inputs that you put in, the more kind of hours that you put in, the more output there is. And so that's what the trend is. That's what the data is showing us. And so on average, as I said, the riders can earn anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000, but we've had cases where riders have earned 15,000 ringgit a month. But I mean, those riders are really kind of working that.
How do they do that, and are there safety issues there? Because that is also obviously a concern when the riders, in their thirst and that zeal to earn more money, and sometimes it's a necessity to earn more money as well, push the boundaries of safety.
So actually, I mean, these are kind of outlying cases, right? So it's not every day or every month that every single rider at foodpanda would earn anywhere from, let's say, 13,000 to 15,000 ringgit a month. These are really riders who consider a gig at foodpanda as their primary source of income, and they treat this kind of income source as full-time. A huge majority of the riders that we have in the fleet are still predominantly part-time, and so they would take out maybe 2 to 3 hours at max out of the day to work with foodpanda. So those are definitely edge cases, and I would not use that as kind of a benchmark to correlate how much a rider can earn on average. But in terms of safety issues, of course, we are very cognizant of the fact that there may be safety issues, and this is why we've rolled out variable schemes or a variety of schemes when it comes to insurance, and we try to protect our riders in every way possible. And the good thing about these schemes is that the riders don't have to pay a premium. We actually absorb the costs. At the same time, there's also a lot of education needed. And this is not only a burden on foodpanda, not only the responsibility on our end, but we have to work with government officials. We have to work with kind of public stakeholders to make sure that the riders are aware of what good conduct implies on the roads when they kind of drive across to deliver orders. And I think this requires a lot more focus and attention.
Now, Sai, you're in a business which is hyper competitive, and then you've got large players like AirAsia who are now coming into the game. How do you plan to stay ahead of the competition?
So what I'll say first up is, it's not an easy game to get into. As I mentioned earlier, there's always kind of margin pressures that you have to be aware of. There's very high risk of margin compression the more you scale. But what I can say is, alongside that, is that there's still, huge opportunities in terms of how much more value can be unlocked, especially in Malaysia. I think right now, we're probably not scratching the surface. We're probably 1 or 2 levels deeper, but there's still a lot of white spaces available for us. There's still almost a blue ocean available for us in some areas where we don't operate and where we want to launch our services.
Okay, tell us more about that. I mean, you've got new initiatives like Pandamart and foodpanda shops and things like that. Can you just give us some insights into some of the things that you have rolled out and some of the things you're going to roll out?
So yeah, great. I think great segue into discussing how we have diversified ourselves. And so what we looked at is what kind of businesses would make sense if we place them adjacently to the food delivery platform that we operate. And of course, food delivery is always going to be our core. But what we wanted to see is how consumers react if we place some other products or some other items onto the platform. And the most adjacent businesses, the most complementary businesses that we saw that would fit into this mold would be delivery of items such as groceries, consumable products, so on and so forth. And so we launched a vertical called New Verticals. I mean, not very ingenious in terms of naming, but what it basically means is we now deliver items from the likes of Tesco, from the likes of Village Grocer. So these are, again, groceries, fresh products, snacks, et cetera, by leveraging delivery capabilities or the logistics capabilities that we have. Alongside that, we also saw that there was great opportunity in terms of investing ourselves into what we call dark stores. So imagine kind of a supermarket with no walk-in, that encompasses a very small space, so around 2,000 to 3,000 square feet.
Yeah,
so,
and Sai, I went and researched. I know you have one in Bangsa.
That's right. That's right.
Yes,
Yes.
I went and take a look at that. I watched the riders when I was doing research for this interview.
Yeah, we have about 40 spread across the country. And what we want to kind of enable ourselves to do is basically ensure that whoever you are as a customer, you can get access to your favorite dishes and meals, but also to your favorite house items, consumables, groceries, whatever it is, in 30 minutes or less, which has led us down this path of understanding how we can strategically construct these dark stores all across the country.
Now moving forward, what are the plans for foodpanda? What are the expectations of your bosses in Berlin in terms of growth in Malaysia?
So, as I mentioned earlier, we see a lot of opportunities and we see a lot of value that we can still unlock in Malaysia itself. And that can basically be broken down into two or three things. One is that there's still a lot of kind of blanket opportunities available for us to extend or expand our services into the smaller townships. So I'm talking about places where populations range from 5,000 to 10,000 inhabitants. That's how deep we want to go. And we still see that there's a lot of opportunities for us to make sure that we make ourselves present. The second is, of course, to double down in terms of new business, as I mentioned earlier. So this would involve a combination of bringing on more and more merchants that are not food related, that are operate in the non-food space, as well as building more and more dark stores or Pandamarts, as we call them. And the third opportunity that we see is basically to kind of plug ourselves in better within the whole ecosystem. And so as a function of that, we've started a channel called Pickup, where our customers can actually now take away food from physical locations. And we also have started a new service called Panda Pro, which is a subscription-based service, where customers who are loyal to the platform, they can actually subscribe and they can get a whole host of benefits. And in turn, this actually benefits the restaurants when they look at driving increased traffic and footfall across their physical locations.
Now, Sai, final question. You've learned a lot building up foodpanda in Malaysia, pivoting, dealing with issues relating to drivers, logistics, merchant issues. What are the key lessons that you've learned in the building this business that you can share with other business leaders and entrepreneurs?
So if I were to put on my entrepreneurial hat, I mean, one thing I would look at is basically where you're getting the most ROI. I think before the show aired, we had an interesting conversation in terms of how you are operating your business from a marketing perspective or a marketing spend perspective. And that's something I think to always keep top of mind in terms of where you get the most ROI. It's not necessary to go and spend big dollars on channels like Facebook, YouTube, Instagram from day one. What's important is to build up a loyal customer base. The second thing that I would suggest is always to have a revenue model or a business model that focuses on profitability first and foremost. Of course, growth needs to be a factor of that in terms of driving profitability and better margins. But I think many people get lost in these stories of how companies become unicorns and decacorns without focusing on the actual numbers itself. The reason why they have that cushion to become a unicorn or a decacorn is because they have a clear path to profitability. And the third thing is, of course, to really understand your customers, whoever they are, or stakeholders. And from my perspective at foodpanda, that includes merchants, riders, and our consumers, to really understand how they're behaving and to stay closely connected to the pulse.
Now, Sai, it's been fascinating having this conversation with you. Thank you for taking the time to be on the show.
No worries. Thank you so much, Brian. It's always a pleasure.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez. I've been talking to Sayantan, Managing Director of foodpanda Malaysia, on Biztech's Enterprise Show. This video will be on our Facebook and LinkedIn sites, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please subscribe and like our various platforms. Thanks a lot for tuning in.